Coming in at number 10, we have Dungeons & Dragons Was Evil. I don't know about you guys, but I think Dungeons & Dragons is so much fun. You get to jump into a fantasy world and do whatever you want, be whoever you want, and just feel like an overall badass. And the best part is, most of this stuff is free. It's a game that requires a lot of time, but not a lot of loot. But unfortunately, back in the 80s, many religious groups saw this game as something satanic. I mean, you're pretending to be a wizard and whatnot, which is supposed to be very unholy. The news picked up this controversy and then started running stories about the dangers of Dungeons & Dragons and how it could corrupt children. There were massive protests to get the game banned, which is really hard because you literally only need a pen and paper to play it. On top of this, some people were even saying that kids were committing suicide after playing this game. I think we can all agree now that this game is harmless and actually very good for your mind because it helps you focus and you're constantly doing math. But this is how far it went. There was a TV movie called Mazes and Monsters that starred Tom Hanks. It came out in 1982 and it was a bunch of teens who play D&D and then go crazy from it. Coming in at number 9, we have A Burning Plane. On February 27th, 1980, a standard flight would turn into many people's scariest moment. A flight was landing in Manila and things didn't go exactly as planned. It hit the runway a little too hard and bounced. This caused the plane to catch on fire with 124 passengers and 11 crew members stuck on board. People started to jump out of the plane onto the tarmac so they didn't die in the billowing flames. And in all this chaos, only one person died, mostly because of the bravest flight attendant who has ever walked the earth. Wang Huang stood at the door of the plane, grabbing people who couldn't move and threw them off the plane to safety. The news article said that even while her clothes were on fire, she still continued to save lives. What is this lady doing as a flight attendant? She should be in the army or something. Huang had some minor injuries, but if it wasn't for her, many more people would have died on that flight. Coming in at number 8, we have Just Say No. America has always had a strange relationship with drugs. They keep trying to keep them out, but it also seems like the CIA started the crack epidemic. So who really knows what's going on behind the scenes? But one of the big pushes in the 80s was the Just Say No campaign, that kicking addiction was as easy as just saying no. It's just a little willpower, that's all you need. And I put this on a list of scary things because that's a terrible message to send out to people, and we're still seeing the ripple effects to this day. Telling people to just say no to get off drugs ignores all the links between drugs and mental health, the effect of your social economic situation, and the fact that drug companies are peddling the gateway drugs. Forget about calling alcohol and cannabis gateway drugs. What about Ritalin? That's speed. You're giving kids speed. Thankfully, we have a much more open mind when it comes to helping people with addiction problems. Coming in at number 7, we have the demonic Teddy Ruxpin. If you don't remember Teddy Ruxpin, then just think about Furbies. And if you don't remember what Furbies are, then just think about if you took Siri and stuffed it in a teddy bear, but it was even more useless. Teddy Ruxpin was a marvel of its time, a talking animatronic bear that you could bring home. All the kids wanted this toy so bad. They were going absolutely ballistic for it. But a little while after the launch, children were terrified of this little stuffed bear. Some parents thought that the devil had possessed the toy and was gonna bring harm to their family. Well, it turns out this was a minor scare, and it all came from the batteries running out in the Teddy Ruxpin. With less power, the voice would slow down to the point where it sounded like a demon. And with this being new tech on the market, and with people not knowing how to react, they did what people always do when they don't know how to react. They freaked out. Coming in at number 6, we have the Cabbage Patch Wars. Now, this isn't the war you'll read about in the history books because I kind of just made it up, but here's what's actually true. During the 80s, the American economy was at a huge upswing. Consumerism was at an all-time high, and one of the biggest things on the market was the newly coveted Cabbage Patch Kids doll. Everyone wanted one, so most stores were selling out faster than they could keep them in stock. This led to Black Friday style fights over dolls. There were several occasions where people would throw down right in the middle of a Kmart to try and beat the hell out of someone so they could walk away with the prize of a stuffed toy they saw on TV. What a crazy world. Thank God we don't live like that anymore. Just kidding, we still do that stuff all the time. Coming in at number 5, we have the Time Man of the Year 1982. Now think back to the 80s, specifically to the year 1982. Who do you think would have been the most influential person of that year? So important that they would have been put on the cover of Time magazine. Well, it was none other than the computer. It was a trick question. It wasn't a person at all. It was a thing that was revolutionizing the world and continues to shape our world to this day. Now, why would I put it on a list of scary things? Well, because it's kind of freaky. If we do do head towards a future where robots take over the world and we all become human slaves, we will look back to the cover of that magazine as the birthplace of our demise. I mean, Hitler was also the man time of the year. I'm just saying. I mean, we're probably all gonna be fine, and I'm probably just being a drama queen, but maybe I'm right. Coming in at number 4, we have the Challenger disaster. Some of you may be aware of the tragic event that took place in 1986. There was a rocket that was set to go out to space and it had teachers on board, which was a big deal. So much of a big deal that school children all over America were watching it on live TV. Someone kids felt attached to was going to go into space, somewhere where few people had gone before. This idea was going to give a generation of kids the hope and interest to go into space and travel the vast unknown. And then just a little over a minute after takeoff, a faulty O-ring burst, which caused fuel to leak and ignite. The Challenger shuttle exploded in the air and chunks of debris rained down into the ocean, and the 7 crew members on board were killed. The generation of children that were destined to want to go to space were now traumatized. The whole event was remembered as one of the worst disasters in space travel history. Coming in at number 3, we have the mass exodus of Cuba. Dictatorships are a terrible thing, and in 1980 over 100,000 Cubans said that they had enough and it was time to move to somewhere else. So they jumped on boats and they headed towards Florida. This was a grueling trip, but it was worth it to save their families and their future generations from the conditions that they were forced to live in. Thank God this happened, because it saved thousands of lives and brought the Cuban sandwich to America. Have you ever had a Cuban sandwich? They are amazing. Coming in at number 2, we have Reagan gets hit. Becoming president seems cool in theory right before someone shoots you right in the chest. That's right, in 1981, the newly elected president Ronald Reagan was shot while walking out of a building in DC. If I was him, I would have fired my intelligence guys after this, because this guy was able to slip a bullet through and hit Reagan right in the chest. But apparently it takes more than bullets to slow this old man down, because he didn't stop ticking. This guy is like the Terminator or something. But the guy who shot him, John Hinckley Jr., was captured and was actually found not guilty due to reasons of insanity. Of course, he wasn't allowed to walk free. He had to spend 30 years in a mental institution. The reason Hinckley said he shot the president was to impress Jodie Foster. I don't think it really worked. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have AIDS is discovered. Nothing like a decade of free love to be followed by the most deadly sexually transmitted disease of all time. I mean, we're just trying to have a little fun over here. Throughout the early 80s, a new sickness was attacking the immune system of people. It was completely unknown what this sickness was. It wasn't until 1983 that the virus was labeled. Now, when we look back through history, it's thought that the first contraction of AIDS was probably in the 1930s, but it wasn't making headlines until the 1980s. And with this discovery came widespread fear, and with the fear, just like anything else, came misinformation. People thought the virus had something to do with the gay community, that it was a homosexual disease. It was thought that infected people would die in a few weeks, that people could catch AIDS through just touching someone. This led to widespread panic.
Starting us off at number 10 is Cropsey. Kids growing up in Staten Island during the 80s had probably been told the story of Cropsey over and over again. Legend has it this boogeyman lived in the woods and would disembowel kids at night. Kids would go crying to their parents at night scared of the boogeyman, and they would assure them that don't worry kids, he's not real. But he was. Andre Rand was a weird man. He once randomly picked up 11 kids from a YMCA in a school bus, fed them, and then took them to an airport in New Jersey without any of their parents knowing. No one was hurt, but he still went to prison for 10 months for just being an absolute creep. Fast forward to 1981, 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes fails to come home after going to the store with her friend. Andre pulled up to the duo and pulled Holly into his car and drove off, and eyewitnesses confirmed it. 1983, 11-year-old Thais Jackson goes missing. 1984, 20-year-old Hank Gaffario goes missing, and despite him being slightly old, he was described as not the smartest. Finally, in 83, Jennifer Schwager goes missing as well. Eyewitnesses saw her with Andre last before finding her body a month later. By 1988, Andre is charged with her kidnapping and murder, but only convicted with the former. Sentenced to 25 years in prison, he would have been free in 2008 had he not been convicted with kidnapping Holly as well. He'll finally be released in 2037 unless he of course dies of old age before that. So yes, the legend of Cropsey was real. It was Andre. Coming in at number 9 is satanic panic. Originating in the US during the 80s, people were shitting themselves over the possibility that satanic ritual abuse was happening and involved physical or sexual abuse of an individual for the greater good or evil of a satanic ritual. The publication of Michelle Smith's book Michelle Remembers details how she believes satanic rituals involved sacrificing children. The book gained a lot of media success, which led to a bunch of new mandatory reporting laws and child protection across the world. Then in 1983 came the McMartin preschool trial, which contained allegations of children being hurt in satanic ritual abuse at a daycare. Soon after, 100 other preschools across the country were investigated based on similar allegations. So moral panic of the devil was super heightened during the 80s, and I feel like people still fear the devil now. I mean, I say not today Satan almost every single day, so I'm pretty much protected, so joke's on you. Number 8, we have the Montauk Project. This was supposedly a series of classified US government experiments that took place at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station. The reason behind the project was trying to find a way to develop psychological warfare techniques, experiment on children, open portals to other dimensions, and just dabble a little in time travel. Stories about the project have circulated since the 80s, and the main fuel came from Preston Nichols, who claimed to have uncovered repressed memories of his own involvement. He also claimed he is routinely abducted by the government against his will so they can do God knows what to him. Nichols came out with the Montauk Project series where he exposed what all goes on, including apparently the faking of the moon landings. Fun fact, TV show Stranger Things was actually inspired by the Montauk Project, so much so that Montauk was going to be the show's name. Can you imagine? It just doesn't have the same ring. Stranger Things. Montauk. It's not. No. Filling at number 7 slot is Slave Master. Remember when you got chainmail or spam in your inbox like multiple times a day, and ironically it was always from your friends because the email said something like, oh, if you don't forward this to 10 of your contacts, your love life will be horrible for the next 10 years, or some shit like that. I remember the days. But nowadays they are replaced by spam emails from companies' mailing lists that you don't even remember ever subscribing to. Literally during my lunch break I just go through my emails and unsubscribe because I'm like, dude, stop spamming me. Either way, around the year 2000 a lot of people got a scary chainmail warning them about an AIM user called Slave Master. He was meant to be a serial killer that lured women to his house after talking to them in these chat rooms. The chainmail varies in what the guy's username was. Sometimes it was Sweet Cali Guy Forever or Monkey Man 935. Serial killer and all-around crook John Edwards Robinson started his spree of murders in the 80s in Kansas City. His modus operandi involved trolling online BDSM communities, and do you know what his username was on those sites? Slave Master. 2 of his victims' bodies were found on his property in 2000, and he was finally convicted in 2002. Goodbye! I know there's a lot of talk about the 2000s in that one, but I mean he did start committing crime in the 80s, so it's technically an 80s urban legend. Ha! Now at number 6 is Stairway to Heaven. This popular song by Led Zeppelin was released towards the end of 1971, but it took until 1982 for it to gain a lot of attention, but for the wrong reasons. Television evangelist Paul Crouch announced on the Trinity Broadcasting Network that the song contained satanic lyrics if you played the song backwards. The message can be found during the line, "If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now." When played backwards, it's meant to say, "Here's to my sweet Satan, the one whose little path would make me sad, whose power is Satan. He'll give you 666. There was a little tool shed where he made us suffer. Sad Satan." Surely not all of that came from that little sentence that I said prior. Either way, the band itself has ignored these claims, and their record company even said, dude, our turntables only play in one direction, and that is forward. Regardless, this was a huge urban legend from the 80s, because even I heard it nearly 20 years later when I was born. I still hear about it now and it's 2020. But, funnily enough, I've never actually heard the song. LOL. Coming in at number 9 is Buckling Up. I legit thought this was fake, but apparently it's 100% true. Up until 1984, no one was legally required to wear a seatbelt while they were in a car. The law in the States was that seatbelts had to be included in personal vehicles, but they weren't mandatory to wear. My parents constantly remind me to wear my seatbelt anytime I'm in a car. I feel like that's one of the first important life lessons you get taught, so I can't even imagine that there was a time you didn't do it and it was seen as completely fine. Not dangerous, just optional. Do you hear that? I'm atting my parents for that one. There was a time you were in a car without wearing a seatbelt. Although I don't advertise this at all. Always wear a seatbelt no matter what. Always. This has been a PSA. And number 4 is Michael Jackson. Okay, Thriller. This one is low-key funny, but in the 80s and 90s there was this urban legend that had people believing that Michael Jackson was the same person as his sister LaToya Jackson. And honestly, I do get why people believed it. I know siblings looking similar is very common, but they looked uncannily identical. It was very creepy. There have been times where I've seen paparazzi pictures of LaToya wearing a hat and I thought it was Michael Jackson. I mean, that was obviously before his death. Now there's no mistaking it and the legend is clearly false, but it spread so quickly that LaToya was actually asked about it in an interview back in 1988. She said, "I've always been a very big supporter of Michael's career. We've always been there for each other, but we are definitely not each other." Case closed. Filling at number 3 slot is Andy Kaufman. The famous actor-comedian was known for playing the character Foreign Man on the show Taxi in the late 70s, early 80s. Unfortunately, he died in 1984 at the age of 35 due to lung cancer. His death certificate says 1984, but Andy also routinely spoke of faking his own death as a massive hoax or prank, so people didn't know whether to believe he had actually died. There was also a rumor that Andy was gay and was one of the first people who died of AIDS, but that it was hidden from the public. In 2013, Andy's brother Michael was at a comedy club and got a letter that was apparently from Andy, and it said that he had a daughter that was born in 1989. After his supposed death. After investigating the claim, Michael disclosed that it was fraud and that he is truly dead. He's apparently also been seen after his death multiple times, and I feel like faking your own death isn't uncommon. People think Elvis and Tupac did it too, so I mean... Now at number 2 is the real parentage. Unless you live under a rock, then you have probably heard of a little family called the Kardashians. The mega-rich group has overcome scandal after controversy, after 72-day marriages, and after not paying Bangladeshi workers for making their products. Kylie, you're a billionaire, pay your workers. Sorry, there was something stuck in my throat. I think it was called The Rich Exploiting the Poor. But one urban legend never seems to leave the family alone, and that's the true parentage of Khloe, who was born in '84. In a 2009 episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Khloe asks her mum Kris if she's adopted, and her mum says no. And I can see why she'd ask. Other than the big ass, all her features are slightly lighter and a bit different to her sisters. A maternity test proved Kris was telling the truth, but that doesn't mean people thought Robert Kardashian was the father. Now, if you're unaware, Robert was a lawyer and was friends with and represented O.J. Simpson while he was on trial for murdering his wife and supposed lover. People thought O.J. was Khloe's real dad, and Kris was like, absolutely not. I did cheat on Rob, but that was after Khloe was born and it wasn't with O.J. I'm not sure if that's meant to help her case, but it certainly doesn't make her look good. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying look at pictures of O.J.'s daughter Sydney next to pictures of Khloe, and then make your own assumption, make your own conclusion. I'm not gonna say anything. And finally, at number 1 is Natalie Wood. The Golden Globe actress was in movies like Rebel Without a Cause, West Side Story, and more. Her personal life was quite complicated. She was married to actor Robert Wagner, then they got divorced, then she married producer and screenwriter Richard Gregson. They divorced 3 years later, and then she remarried Robert. Either way, what was even more complicated were the circumstances surrounding her death. In November of 1981, Wood was filming the movie Brainstorm and was having a relaxing weekend boat trip to Catalina Island. Here are the people that were present at the time. We have Robert, since it was his yacht, Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain Dennis Davin. At 8 AM on the 29th, authorities discovered Natalie's body a mile away from the boat. The first suspected cause of death was accidental drowning and hypothermia, but we don't really know how true that is. Firstly, the autopsy results indicated she had bruises all over her arms and body and an abrasion on her left cheek. Now, how do you get those injuries during drowning? The night before, Wood and Wagner had a fight because Wood and Walken were getting flirty, and that made Wagner incredibly jealous. Apparently she had tried to board a dinghy to leave the yacht but slipped while in the process, which again doesn't make sense. She was terrified of water her whole life, she couldn't swim, and she was drunk. Witnesses heard a woman screaming for help that night, and Wagner wouldn't let Dennis turn on the searchlight. So what happened to Natalie Woods that night? We'll never know.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Wyoming incident. According to internet legend, this was a broadcast hack that happened in 2008, affecting a number of communities in the town of Niobrara in Wyoming. Their regular news show was interrupted with this.
Preparation for the 2008 general election. Republican President Jackson.
Over the next 6 minutes or so, viewers were shown text messages and strange visuals with audio snippets playing over them. Every 10 to 15 seconds a message would appear announcing that this was a special presentation. The text would say things like, "You will see such pretty things," and "You are ill, we just want to fix you," and "What hides in your mind?" Now that last question was later answered with the chilling message of, "We have already seen it." What was even stranger was that people reported having a physical reaction to the footage. This included vomiting, hallucinations, and headaches. Others said that the frequencies played made viewers' eyeballs vibrate and create visual hallucinations. I'm glad we didn't show the whole clip then. Next up at number 9 now, we have Max Headroom. Now this is perhaps the most famous one on the list. Maybe some of you guys have seen it. On the evening of November 22nd, 1987, many people were enjoying an episode of Doctor Who on Chicago WTTW Channel 11. For those Who fans out there, the episode was Horror of Fang Rock. Anyway, the broadcast was interrupted by a signal intrusion. Suddenly, viewers saw an unknown person wearing a Max Headroom mask and sunglasses. Max Headroom was a TV character from a show in the mid-80s. The imposter hijacked the broadcast for 90 seconds in which he rambled about Coca-Cola, the TV series Clutch Cargo, and WGN anchor Chuck Swirsky. To be honest, even with subtitles, it's quite difficult to make out what's being said. At the time, an FCC engineer said that the perpetrators would face a maximum $10,000 fine, up to a year in prison, or both. It's been over 30 years since the event though, and the culprits have never been caught. Coming in at the number 8 spot now, we have Vrillon. This is a strange one from 1977. During a regular news show on Southern Television, there was a broadcast interruption just after 5 PM on November 27th. After some static and visual warping, a voice made this announcement.
This is the voice of Vrillon, representative of the Ashtar Galactic Command, speaking to you.
That person, calling themselves Vrillon, claimed to be an alien commander from an intergalactic association. The disembodied voice spoke for about 6 minutes. The main message was a warning to all humans to put down our weapons of war and to enter a new age of Aquarius. Then, and only then, would we make it to the next level of evolution.
Suck your energy from you, the energy you call money, and we'll put it to evil ends, giving you worthless dross in return.
Moving on to number 7 now, we have Playboy. I'm sure I don't need to explain to you guys what Playboy is, and if I do, I probably shouldn't. Needless to say, its late night TV shows have been very popular for many, many years. It's one of those channels where you wouldn't expect to see much religious talk, shall we say. However, that's exactly what you would have seen if you tuned into the channel on September 6, 1987. Someone interrupted the broadcast that night and displayed a quote from the Bible. I wonder how that went down with the Playboy viewers. The Bible verses were taken from Exodus and Matthew and read, "Thus saith the Lord thy God, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." The white text and black background appeared during a movie that Playboy had on called Three Daughters, and a number of viewers phoned in to ask what was going on. Police were able to trace the signal though, and 3 years later, a man called Thomas Haney was identified as the culprit. Next up at number 6 now, we have the nuke. Okay, for this one, I want you guys to do a bit of imagining now. I want you to imagine you're just chilling at home, just watching a channel that's showing beautiful scenery, live, it's playing relaxing music, that sort of thing, and then you see this. Yeah, that looked a lot like a nuke, and people in Czechoslovakia thought so too when this appeared on a TV show called Panorama in June 2007. The show usually just showed scenic footage of the Czech countryside to attract tourists to Prague and the surrounding area. When the camera appeared to show a nuclear bomb exploding during its morning broadcast, all hell broke loose. Some people who lived in the area started trying to leave before the radiation spread. Others were contacting the government asking what to do. The government received so many panic calls that they had to issue an official statement confirming that Prague had not been bombed. It turns out that the footage was created as a performance piece by a group called Zathoven. I'm sure their artistic message is appreciated by some people out there, but maybe not the ones who thought they were actually actually having to flee for their lives. Coming in at the number 5 spot now, guys, we have The Old Couple. This is a really strange one that occurred in July 2007 during regular broadcasting on ABC's affiliate channel WJLA. This image appeared on the screen. Now, to this day, nobody is exactly sure what this picture is of. Clearly, it's two faces, one of them is smiling and one of them looks quite concerned. The faces look like they've been computer generated. Now to me, it looks like something out of a 90s video game. This creepy image stayed on the screen for several seconds with no sound before completely vanishing. Many people said there was a dark meaning to all of this, that this was no ordinary interruption. The cable company in charge of the broadcast said there was a programming mix-up from an advertisement for the Oprah Winfrey Show. That seemed to satisfy most people, but things took a turn when videos of the event were all removed from YouTube due to restricted access. To this day, I still couldn't find any clips of this on YouTube. All that has survived is this image and the questions that come with it. Coming at number 4 now, we have War of the Worlds. Have you guys ever seen the War of the Worlds movie with Tom Cruise? I really like that movie, I'm not gonna lie. But did you know where the title for that movie came from? In 1938, future filmmaking legend Orson Welles created a radio drama based on H.G. Wells' novel The War of the Worlds. It was made to sound like a genuine news broadcast about aliens from Mars invading Earth. If you guys were to hear it on the radio today, you might think, oh, this is obviously a piece of written drama, it's not real. Well, back in 1938, on the eve of World War II, it was a very different time. Many people listening to the broadcast missed the introduction where it clearly states that the following is a piece of radio drama, and they thought it was totally real. This is what they heard.
About 20 yards to my right. Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill.
Now, according to legend, some people were so convinced that America was being invaded by Martians that they fled their homes in a panic. In the following days, there was an outcry for broadcasters to be regulated to stop this thing kind of happening ever again. That failed, and the piece went down in history as one of the most famous pieces of radio drama ever, and possibly one of the greatest pranks of all time. Next up at number 3 now, we have Handy Manny. Some of our North American viewers may have grown up watching this kids show. The animated TV series follows Manny, a repairman with talking tools. It's fun, it's educational, they sing, you get the idea. Handy Manny is also famous though for a shocking broadcast interruption which occurred on May 1st, 2007. Viewers of the show in Lincroft, New Jersey had their episode interrupted by a clip from an adult movie. Yeah. Say no more. Many of the other interruptions we talked about usually last for 10, 15, 30 seconds. The adult film clip on Handy Manny went on for several minutes. Naturally, people wanted an explanation. Thousands of kids must have seen this. Comcast was the network that was responsible for the intrusion, or at least they should have been the ones to stop it from happening. They didn't have an answer for why it happened, and over a decade on now, they still don't. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Mayday. On January 3rd, 2007, Channel 7 in Australia was airing a Canadian documentary called Mayday, which features cases of air disasters. At some point during the broadcast, things got strange. The visuals continued as normal, but the audio started repeating a single phrase on a loop. One quick-thinking YouTuber uploaded this video of the event. Many people think that the voice is that of a man from America's deep south saying the phrase, "Jesus Christ, help us all, Lord." See what you think. That went on for an astonishing 6 minutes before everything returned to normal. Many people wanted answers, but Channel 7 were very evasive. They denied that there had been an intrusion, but also disputed what the clip was actually saying. They claimed the voice said, "Jesus Christ, one of the Nazarenes." The fact that so many people disagree with that has only added fuel to the fire that something very strange happened that day. And finally, number 1 now, we have Coast to Coast AM. That's the name of this talk show run by Art Bell. He was used to strange calls on his show, but things got even stranger on September 12th, 1997. That night, Art got a call from a guy who claimed to have been an employee at the mysterious Area 51 base, where conspiracy theorists say the US Air Force contained and studied aliens and their crashed spacecraft. The caller sounded terrified and claimed that they were coming for him and that he didn't have much time to share with the world what he knew about Area 51. He talked about extra-dimensional beings who are not what they appear to be, that they have infiltrated the US military and are now taking over.
Okay, well, what we're thinking of as aliens are they're extra-dimensional beings.
The caller began to sound more erratic and panicked. Finally, he started talking about how governments are trying to get human populations down to a manageable number so that they're easier to control. Just after this, the line went dead when the power cut out at the station. By the time they got the backup generators running, the caller was gone. Conspiracy theorists say that it was more than a coincidence that the caller was cut off and never heard from again just when he began to spill the beans on secret government activity. What do you guys think?